Okay. Hi. We ready? Yeah? Okay, I just wanted to do a brief introduction of our guest today. You will know our guest today for the Bruce Mayhew lecture this year is Edward Tiryakian, Professor Emeritus at Duke University. Ed once wrote that nobody is born a sociologist, but some at least start very close and last very long, because this year, 2008, marks Ed's 60th consecutive year in sociology. Ed began his travels in sociology in 1948 as an undergraduate at Princeton. He subsequently earned his MA and PhD degrees at Harvard, where he worked closely with both Talcott Parsons and Peter M. Sorokin. Ed thereupon taught at Princeton, Harvard, and Duke University, where he has been since 1965. Rumor has it that Ed received emeritus status in 2004, but nobody really notices the difference because Ed is still writing for all the readers and he is still teaching for all of his students. I was finding a way, or I was hoping to find a convenient way to introduce you a little bit to Ed's work. Now, so an overview of Ed's work cannot be brief because there's just too much work to talk about. However, I'm going to give it a try, relying on the sensitizing qualities of concepts and relating my introduction, at least in part, to the person to whom this memorial is dedicated, which is Bruce Mayhew, whom you see here in what I've been told to be a very characteristic pose, if you will. And as some of you, or most of you will know, Bruce was a very celebrated member of our department until his unfortunate death in 1988, at which point this memorial was instituted, so we've been doing it for 20 years. However, this picture doesn't introduce how I'm going to introduce Ed's work, but this picture does. This picture, not only do we see Bruce, we also see one of his most famous and smartest graduate students. Those are the two people in the foreground. You may recognize one of them, or you may not recognize one of them. That is also not what I want to talk about to introduce Ed's work. What I want to talk about are the two people in the background. If you look very carefully, here, you see it? You see a rather small, short-statured, very intelligent man with a gray beard who at some point was also a North Carolinian, because the person with the gray beard is Peter Blau. And the person sitting next to him, whom you may not recognize, was at the time actually a member of this department, of the Sociology department in South Carolina. He seems to have a long ponytail. I don't think he has that anymore. And he is now actually a colleague of Ed, because this is Miller McPherson. And this will provide me with an opportunity, however indirectly, to introduce Ed's work. Because Miller McPherson, then a member of the Sociology department, relied on the work of Peter Blau to introduce the notion of Blau space. And Blau space in German would be this, blue space, but it isn't. Blau space is to be visualized as follows. This is Blau space. So sociologically, for some people, for network structuralists, this makes a lot of sense. See? Now, Miller McPherson, fortunately or not, is not in this department anymore, and likewise, I am. Therefore, I'm taking this opportunity of our guest tonight to introduce you to the new concept of Ed World. Ed World has a very distinct origin. And Ed World is actually not difficult to understand, because this is the visualization of Ed World. And as you can see, this is the Rand McNally version, and this should be very familiar to most of you. But in some sense, of course, we are not at all familiar with this, because I don't think that many of us can claim to have visited every continent in the world. Well, let me therefore introduce you to the first aspect of Ed World. Ed World is very huge, but Ed Tiryakian has visited every continent of the world in the year 2002 alone. In that year, in 2002, and I'm now going to introduce you to Ed World like this, because no doubt my information is only partial, but in any case, we leave out, for the present purposes, the American continent, because inhabitants of Ed World are never ethnocentric. And also for convenience sake, so this is the snapshot version of Edworld. In 2002, Ed visited, and here he is. Ed visited Tallinn, Estonia, Riga, Latvia, Brisbane, Australia, Nanjing, China, Coventry, United Kingdom, Lund, Sweden, and Royaumont, France. That was the year 2002. Now, after such a busy year, Ed took it easy in 2003, and then he visited Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, and resisting what he himself has called a fleeting temptation to see Baghdad. But additionally, in that year, Ed managed to squeeze in Genoa and Milan in Italy and Seoul in Korea. Now, not counting doubles, we do it this way. Ed also visited Beijing, China, Sofia, Bulgaria, Stockholm, Sweden, Ohrid, Macedonia, Oxford, England, Uppsala, Sweden, Moscow and St. Petersburg, Russia, Cardiff, Wales, and Berlin, Germany. And that was in the past 10 years alone. Now you can see perhaps that some territories are left out. Not so. Because all we have to do is go about 50 years back. And during his graduate studies days alone at Harvard, Ed worked in Austria, in the Philippines, and in Japan. And while he was at, though evidently not always in Princeton, Ed also traveled extensively throughout Africa. First, he did all the French-speaking countries, because Ed grew up as a child in France and speaks French fluently. But once he had done all the French-speaking countries, he, of course, also had to do all the English-speaking countries. So then he also visited Senegal, Zanzibar, South Africa, the then countries Congo and Rhodesia, Cameroon, Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and Nigeria. Our picture of Edworld is not yet complete, but please note that what you see here is what Ed did since 2002 and before 1956. In other words, we are leaving out 42 years of his career, and still we are left with this. Now, obviously, Ed's world is not only made up of different places. Ed's world is also a world full of, Ed's world is also a world full of ideas. Of special interest are, of course, Ed's studies of nationalism, along with his work on ethnicity and globalization. Without nationalism, there wouldn't be any nation states for Ed to visit. And without ethnicity and globalization, there wouldn't be any problems with ethnicity and its continually shifting borders. So as a traveling student of nationalism, how fortunate it must be for Ed to witness yet another secession movement and the formation of yet another country. If only the country Bosnia and Herzegovina would turn into two countries, the country Bosnia and the country Herzegovina, because then Ed could visit two countries. Closely related to his travels are Ed's comparative interests. These include a wide range of topics such as occupational stratification, which was his dissertation actually, apartheid, war, questions of modernity, and civilizational analysis. And actually I started with Ed's maybe least developed or interest, which is saying something, because his most substantive interest is in the area of religion. Unfortunately, during his graduate student days, Ed wanted to study the sociology of law, but he was 50 years too soon to read my book, so that couldn't happen. Therefore, he turned to the study of the obvious choice, Puritanism in the United States, but his work of religion also includes the altogether not obvious study of occult movements. And finally, Ed is also the student par excellence, that's French, in terms of sociological theory and the history of sociological thought. And it is in this context that you see the following pictures, because Ed has done a lot of work on the work and the lives of people like Talcott Parsons, Peter M. Sorokin, Max Weber, and of course, Emil Durkheim, for whom Ed is working, so he tells us. And it is also the work of Durkheim that I think will influence Ed's talk today about cartoons. So we have a nice Durkheim cartoon for him here. And this is Ed's world. So this is about it. And that's the introduction of his work. And now we give it over to Ed for a phenomenal talk, I'm sure. Okay, thank you.